Ah, look at you.
Multitasking.
Very
Mhm.
fancy. All right. Well, I did make kind of another sheet, and I did the same sort of thing where I just kind of put down the chapter numbers, and then I kind of pulled out what I thought was the heart of each letter. So you can certainly disagree. And of course, it's far more than just one pithy little saying in each letter. So was there a particular place that you want to start or talk about? Or do you just want to keep kind of working through?
I'm happy to work through because honestly, I didn't get to these.
Okay,
last
no
two.
problem at all.
I'll be keen to hear what you have. to say.
Okay, keen. Well, okay, so barring anybody else wanting something different, chapter 19, we have this idea about the enemy, meaning God's idea of love is a contradiction in terms.
Is this 18?
19, oh, sorry. I should be in 18 and I was in 19. Sorry. Okay, now we're in 18. So we're talking about sexual temptation to begin with. And there's Lewis articulates, or Screwtape articulates fairly standard, the demand that the enemy takes, either complete abstinence or unmitigated monogamy. And so Screwtape is just talking about kind of the historical development about sexual temptation. And of course, this fits in with Lewis's passion for medieval and Renaissance literature. He will have been tracking those things, and it has been literature that has shifted things, right? So romantic literature as a genre really did begin to change kind of the face of sexual expectations. And so he attributes that to poets and novelists. And again, we talk about being in love. And here we have this today. So this is still pretty contemporary, right? What the humans call, and is usually short-lived, being in love, now forms the only respectable ground for marriage. So, somebody like Marva Dawn, who is passed on now, but she's a theologian and a doctor of the church. And she talks about this, that one of the reasons why she is against couples writing their own vows for their marriage ceremony is because vows are the things that the church puts on us that we accept. We have to make a vow, so it's similar to ordination, because this is the thing that we are saying as a community, we are holding you to. So that's why the vows are the vows, that I will love this person in sickness and health, richer or poorer, in all circumstances. So in other words, it doesn't matter if I'm in love or not. It doesn't matter if I'm feeling loving today or not. It doesn't even matter if I like this person anymore. I'm still called to, because I took vows, I'm called to be married to them and to love them. Love is not a feeling, but a verb and a choice. And so he's pointing to a contemporary philosophy that if I no longer feel love for that person, which of course at some point I won't feel love for that person, and I might even start to feel love for somebody else, that becomes the grounds for leaving. And then Screwtape gets into the philosophy of hell, which is myself is myself and yourself is yourself. And therefore my good is mine, your good is yours, and they're in competition. So hell is all about consumption. The stronger consuming the weaker. Now you might hear some theory of evolution in that, right? Strongest of the fittest. So there's a bit of a natural bend here. And so to be means to be in competition. So hell cannot understand what it is that God is doing with this philosophy of love. And that's why Screwtape says this is contradictory. It's a lie, can't be true, because hell, founded on this philosophy of mutual consumption, cannot understand the philosophy of mutual love. And so Screwtape points out that this thing that he calls love is rooted in who he is in himself. And you've probably heard me talk about that in terms of the Trinity. 3 persons, 1 substance. So you have this Godhead, which is the perfect love, the interpenetration of the members of the Godhead without consumption, without less. It is free and it is loving. And then God creates out of that in order to draw his creation into that love and have free creatures who are participate in it and enjoy it without losing themselves, but at the same time becoming one with the divine. So that's something that Lewis talked about in Mere Christianity as well. So that goes hand in hand with the idea that we saw last week. And again, we saw in Mere Christianity, where the goal is for our freedom in order to make us sons and not servants, sons and daughters and not servants. And only in that way can we continue to be ourselves and yet join the divine. And so sex is more than just copulation, just reproduction. This is part of God's design for the human person, and that's both a unity and a plurality. Male and female, he created them in his image. And so we have a male, a female produces offspring, and suddenly you have this family. It is diverse, and yet it is one. And so the family itself reflects God's larger act of creation as well as the Godhead. And so Screwtape / Lewis wants to point out to us in our modern context with this philosophy of being in love, contrary to that, the way that God thinks about marriage is about the 2 becoming one flesh, not because they were in love. Stanley Hauerwas is a theologian that you've heard me talk about before. He frames it this way. Teenagers will say they fall in love because they want to have sex. They know from the culture that being in love is the grounds for having sex. Hauerwas says, we don't get married so that we can have sex. It is being married and making the vows that gives us the context and the permission to have sex. And so marriage itself is a calling. But the idea for Screwtape and for Wormwood is try and make the patient, the man, chase after this, again, the fantasy, right, of being in love. And again, so it's moving action into the fantasy and at the same time corrupting the will. And then there's always kind of this razor's edge, right? That Screwtape is walking. So he says, but even a marriage can be dangerous, right? So again, in some ways, the Catholic Church sees marriage as a sacrament. And so Lewis, being an Anglican, is probably echoing that a little bit. Marriage in itself can be holy, just because it was instituted by God for the good of humanity altogether. Well, then we go into chapter 19. I just realized chapter 18, I talk a lot, so I'm going to start pulling other people in. Any thoughts on chapter 19 for those who might have read it more recently? Well, Screwtape is a little bit nervous because he's been talking about the enemy's idea of love, and he's put things in the fairly positive way. And so, again, because hell is about consuming one another, there seems to be a bit of a betrayal from Wormwood, and Uncle Screwtape is a little bit nervous to just clarify that he doesn't believe in this heresy, that this idea that that God, the enemy, must be really has this idea of love is actually a lie, that it cannot be. And the problem is hell can't figure out the real motive. And then we kind of have what we might call the extra biblical scene of why Satan or Lucifer leaves heaven, abandons God. And it's around this idea that God makes human beings to love them, these animals, as Screwtape calls them, not pure spiritual beings, but these half-breeds to some degree. And so Lucifer demands of a God why God really made them, because it can't be love. That makes no sense. And so there's this cock and bull story of disinterested love that he's been circulating ever since. Satan couldn't accept that. And now this is interesting because we have this little scene. So we have God and the devil. He implored the enemy. So Satan implored God to lay his cards on the table and gave him every opportunity. So right there we have Satan, who is a lesser being, created by God, demanding God do something. So that already tells us something about the dynamics of Satan. He admitted that he felt a real anxiety to know the secret. Satan did. The enemy replied, so God said to Satan, I wish with all my heart that you did. So God desires Satan himself to be redeemed. So again, this is a medieval description of kind of the depth of the grace of God. Satan is destroyed ultimately, not because God wishes it, but because there's no other recourse. He cannot be redeemed because he will not be redeemed. So Satan, of course, feels snubbed because he was an angel of light. and he's forcibly thrown out of heaven. And somehow God's whole throne depends on this secret, which is true. But it's true from an inverted perspective, right? So it's the same sort of thing happening, the two different kinds of meanings between what Satan says and what God says. I wish that you could, another secret. And so, if hell ever understood the secret, then the war would be over. Not because hell will have won, but because heaven will have won. Hell will have been converted because then it can accept love rather than consumption. And in the meantime, they have whole departments of research working on it round the clock, trying to crack the code. Theory after theory is being proposed, and it is just a matter of progress. So there's another philosophy of the day, right? The Enlightenment, modernity is a philosophy of progress that World War I and II actually disabused the world of. The idea that we are progressively getting better was alive and well right up until the Second World War. And then the world kind of went, we're not getting better. This is actually a lot worse. And so the idea that there is a progress that is happening, that humanity is moving from, uncivilized to civilized, archaic, or chaos to order, from what we might term as bad to good, or unjust to just, is part of the lie of hell, not because of hell's propaganda, but because hell itself doesn't actually understand the love of God. So that same sort of confidence in the future and in technology and in technique all reflect our human environment. In Lewis's time and today, we continue to think that all we have to do is keep developing more just systems, come up with better techniques, and we will at some point solve all of our problems. It's out there. And that joined together with, at some point, we just keep getting better and better. And again, there will be this termination point when we will no longer need heaven because we will have established it ourselves on earth.
Is that a little bit of a pushback to like Eastern thought too? Like we're so, linear, we like structure, we like formatted. Whereas like when I work with my Eastern students, if you will, there's more of a cyclical
Right.
coming around.
Yeah. So how do you see the two connect?
Well, that's why I'm not, right? Like we want to have structure. We want to have like a reason. We want to have a checklist to
Yes.
kind of meet a goal.
Yes.
Whereas sometimes I see my students, they come around at things through story and
Mhm.
experience,
Mhm.
sense of belonging,
Yes.
and they know it takes time. And so I
Yes.
can kind of see where they're trying to get to a place of like incorporating love in multiple places in a cyclical way.
Yeah.
Whereas we want to box things up
Right.
and give a
right.
reason and a definition and a
Yes.
hypothesis. And it seems too clean and neat
Okay.
because it feels like when we talk about belonging or love, it's messy.
Okay.
Whereas when I see the cyclical, to me, I go, there's opportunity for messiness
Yes.
because we're going to revisit it.
Yes.
Whereas here, no, we don't want to revisit. I've got the answer. Here's the answer. Let's put it in a box.
Yeah.
And so it's harder to fit in the messiness of love, unknowns,
Yeah.
the mysteriousness of it.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly possible. And I think what you're seeing is something good that's helpful. How much Lewis would have seen that or tried to push back? It seems to me that in some ways he sees, we saw it in Horse and His Boy, kind of the British superiority colonialism attitude. Certainly Christianity has been expressed as the truth that the other religions, and he's referred to Mohammedanism, you know, so he doesn't discount those other religions, but he did say, you know, they are pointing to the real thing. So I don't know how much he would say this is him sort of checking Western philosophy in favor of an Eastern philosophy. But I think what you're seeing is certainly worth seeing and fits.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
And
We
of
mentioned
course-
that in chapter 18 about the Western European philosophy.
yeah, yeah,
There is to easily produce, because being in love does very often in Western Europe precede marriage,
yeah,
which is often the obedience that animals design.
yeah,
So it did make that reference to
yeah.
that thinking.
Yep, yeah. Yeah, so he may just be critical,
Yeah.
kind of like a post-modernity, right?
Yeah.
Is a critique of modernity without canceling modernity. Sometimes it's taking modernity further, and sometimes it's just saying this needs to be checked. We can't
Mhm.
make it such a total statement. So,
Dave,
yeah.
is there a way for Bob, and I'm sorry, I forgot names of the other people at the end of to be a little bit louder?
Oh, let me turn the microphone. And I'm sure that they could be louder. Do you
Thank
want
you.
us to repeat everything?
Yes,
Okay, the basic question Tina just said, could Lewis be also kind of checking Western philosophy and maybe favoring more of an Eastern philosophy insofar as Eastern philosophy is a little more cyclical, a little less linear, and because of that has room for a bit more of messiness than Western philosophy does, that tends to just button everything up. So my response to that was, I think, you know, the things that we've seen from Lewis now, I don't know that he would tote an Eastern philosophy in over a Western philosophy. But that I think Tina's observations are good and have a place in our discussion. And that Lewis doesn't reject Eastern philosophy completely out of hand either. So there is room to see that.
thanks for that. I just have to help Bill for a minute, but I
For
really
sure.
want to talk about chapter 21.
Okay,
So maybe if you have to skip over that, if you don't see my picture,
okay,
then I'm busy.
okay,
Thank you.
no problem. Okay. We good to move to chapter 20,
Mhm.
but not 21.
Mhm.
So, I've, I said, have him desire ugly fantasy. It's kind of my summary of this chapter. And so, chastity is an area of virtue that we saw in Mere Christianity. And as we know, it's, unchastity is a vice that people struggle with. So this is one of the arenas of temptation that has been brought up a few times by Screwtape and Wormwood. And so the patient has learned what Lewis wants us to remember, that the struggle of temptation for chastity or unchastity and the maintaining of chastity doesn't last forever. There will come, if we hold on, a time when the struggle with the temptation will end. Even though in the moment of temptation, that struggle seems enduring and like it will never end and like we can't hold on. And I think a little later, maybe in a different chapter, Screwtape will say, you know, it's really humorous when they give in right at the end, just when it was about to the temptation itself, the struggle itself would have ended and they would have been fine. And then they give in. Hal really likes that.
Oh, no, that's not-
But for the brief time, chastity and sexual temptation is no longer a possibility. So again, there's Lewis is speaking to philosophies of his day, that chastity may be unhealthy. And so, the best way to maintain health is to indulge in these things. And so again, this is the movement from virtue morality to you're not sinful, you're sick kind of thing. So a shift in the philosophy of the day. And as a result, it's new grounds for humanity to be attacked. Again, this just may be Lewis reflecting his day. I myself haven't completely made up my mind because I think science does afford us some insights. And so I'm not saying that it's necessarily unhealthy to be chaste. I think we should be chaste. But again, I think we need to be careful that we don't just dismiss cultural discoveries out of hand as necessarily wrong. So I think we need to kind of struggle with both.
I found with all like a lot of these early chapters is all about marriage and sex and adultery and
Yeah,
your illusions and desires.
yeah,
But as I kept reading it, I kept reflecting on the different TV shows and what they pull in.
Mm.
It is exactly what Lewis is saying. They're trying to pull you into this thinking and, this is what it's at. And Hollywood's done a magnificent job of
oh yeah.
screwing up people.
Oh, we're
I think-
bombarded, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, is there a TV show that hasn't got, well, how did they murder him? Why did they murder him? It's
Yeah.
just, you should know all this and the
Yeah.
details and,
Yeah.
well, murder's wrong. I shouldn't be interested in that.
right.
But it's a whole, and it's not just murder, it's the whole sexual scenes and everything.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, maybe didn't have as much TV back
yeah.
in
Yeah.
in Lewis's time. It was just coming in then, but we're hammered with it.
Yeah. And he certainly wouldn't have had a TV. If
Well,
there
in the
was an option.
60s, it would have been there.
but he
Not in
probably
his
wouldn't have-
house.
Oh, I see. Wouldn't
He
yeah,
would not
wouldn't
have
want
been
it.
interested in
No,
TV. No.
No,
Even his books, like the Chronicles of Narnia, he didn't want them made into movies.
yeah.
Mm,
He didn't get his wish.
Nope.
But his estate's making money now.
So it's, it's interesting how, how the world is pulled in these views and,
Yeah.
and everybody watches TV. Oh, I like this show. I like that. Oh, I don't like that show. I don't, but is there a good show out there? I don't know.
Right.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, and I guess it would all depend on how we would define good.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I'm even thinking
I
like
watch them,
Anne of Green
but I know
Gables,
there's
right?
bad
Where
stuff in there.
Rachel Lynn's thoughts about acting altogether, to
Mhm.
see a
Yeah.
play. Those are all lies and
Yeah.
trash, novels are just trash. And so there is kind of a vein of historic Christianity that has seen all of this stuff, and maybe Bridge falls into that category of, time wasters,
Mhm.
fiction, lies, all that kind of stuff. So.
He even talks about the age of jazz.
Going to bridge, they're bashing bridge players again.
Oh, no, I just threw that in because I thought you were away and it was safe.
Like jazz is a bad thing.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But I
Um,
did say, I don't know if people heard me earlier, but I am an avid bridge player. I have been, convicted may be too strong a word, but realizing that I do spend a lot of time studying bridge, playing bridge, and that there needs to be a balance in my life, you know?
Yeah,
I think for me, it's more about that.
yep.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, it's not just bridge, I think for us, um, there's a great deal of difference between Lewis's world. And I think there's 15 years difference between when he died and when I was born, which I love to think about. But we're from different worlds. We live in luxury. Like we don't scratch out for survival, right? So to some degree, the old adage, idle hands are the devil's tools. Yeah.
So I was just curious, like in the Old Testament, there's a story of the gold bowl, and that's kind of like God's on the mountain, so and Moses is up receiving the 10 Commandments at that period. So the people at the time were feeling separated from God
Yes.
in a physical manner because God was supposedly only on the mountain. And we know that is not true because he walked with them in the desert for the 40 years and everything. But in their perspective, gods were in a singular individual place.
Okay. Yeah.
So they built the gold bowl in a replacement to idolize something over God because of the separation.
Yeah.
I was just curiosity, like nowadays, like there's like this idea and more things I find it's like it's a matter of what you idolize over God more so than anything of the singular individual item, activity, or even person like you idolize over God.
Yeah.
So I think would that be a relation to like just the pure idolization over God and like because of a separation of presence, maybe?
Absolutely. Well, and culturally, we've tended to forgotten God, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I talked about that a little bit on Sunday. That's what Romans 1 is talking about. It's not so much God pours out his wrath on these people because they're sinful. This is what happens in the world when the world forgets about God. And so the sin is a result of the forgetting of God. So it's no surprise that we see that. So yes, I think you're right, Isaiah, that when we give other things ultimate meaning, and when we turn to other things for the solution, for help, when we kind of bow down to those things, totally. There's idols for sure. And I think, and so just to kind of tie that to what I was thinking before, again, like how often do we actually pray, Lord, give us today our daily bread, right? I get up in the morning, I pour my bowl of cereal that's sitting in my pantry, and if I run out, I just go buy some more. But once upon a time, God's people literally had to pray, today we need bread. And if you don't provide it, you don't provide the conditions for things to grow, we are in desperate and dire straits, right? And so it's so easy for our culture to turn away and forget about God because there's no gaps most of the time. And so, we have pushed God out of the world. And if you listen to the new atheists, one of the things like a Richard Dawkins will say is we don't need God. We don't need God to explain anything. Science now has sufficient explanation for everything. So, and that was partly because Christians kept saying, okay, well, figured that out, but then there's this gap. And so God must have done that. And so science just keeps saying, no, let's just get rid of the gaps, right? So really the conversation needed to change. Anyways, so yeah, I think you're onto something there for sure.
I mean, something that's very current affairs right now is the economy or finances are going into a recession. What do you see now more and more on TV? Financial advising. This is who you should go with. What do you worry? Here's this. There's a quadruple the amount of investment agencies that are just all popping up now.
Yep.
Because we have the solution for you. We're gonna guide you through this.
Yep.
And it's like to what you say, is the focus any place on God, responsibilities we have, any, no, it's all, we can take care of you. Do this,
Yep.
do that.
Well, if you want to have fun, you've done prayer walks with me where we've talked about kind of the missional texture of neighborhoods. So places of worship traditionally have been the highest points in a community. So once upon a time, the cathedrals were built huge, right?
Mhm.
Big turrets. And you could still go to some towns as you drive in, you can see the cathedrals standing head and shoulders above everything, right? That is the house of worship. If you were to drive downtown right now, what would the tallest building be? It's usually the financial buildings, right?
Mhm.
A TD, a Bank of
Twin
Montreal. I'm thinking
Towers.
Toronto, right? But
Twin Towers.
and so it's the same principle. So our theology is in our architecture. Think about how neighborhoods are built. Once upon a time, if you were to drive around the city of Regina, you would see neighborhoods with churches in them. Now, as neighborhoods are being developed, they are being developed without churches as part of the plan. And instead, you'll find community centers, and there's a
Shopping
new
centers.
center. So again, theology is in the architecture. So that whole idea of idolatry, what do we give ultimate meaning to? What do we rely on? A number of years ago, 2008, when mortgages were failing, there was a crisis. They were bailing out companies. N.T. Wright, who's a theologian and biblical scholar that I really respect, he was Bishop of Durham at the time, and so in Britain sat in the House of Lords, and he used that opportunity to say to them, you are doing for the extremely rich what you refuse to do for the extremely poor. So he's able to use his voice, but again, there's theology there, right? It would be a waste of our money to care for the poor, but because our economy depends on it, we must take care of the rich and do for the rich what we refuse to do for the poor. Give them a handout.
It's twisted.
So there's theology in everything that we do. And this goes back to what you were saying in terms of idolatry, right? So when we talk about, what is the ultimate meaning? Whether that's sexuality, whether that's me, I, the center of spirituality. So there's typical places of temptation in the historical church. Wealth, power, sex, and spirituality. Everybody will struggle with one or more of those four things at any given time in their life. And those are the things that we build idols around as well.
And I think I noticed too that our culture is so independently minded, right? You want to be individual.
Yes.
And so in that individualness of success and whatever, there's shame in not sharing,
Right.
right? And so it's very isolating. So if you
Yes.
struggle with one of those,
Yeah.
I mean, would you come to the church? Where would you go if you
Yeah.
were struggling?
Yes.
And so I think that in itself, and then that can become generational sin, which impacts kids and anxiety and
Yeah.
all the other pieces.
Absolutely.
Whereas at another time, at least there would be more community that you
Yes.
might share the load
Yes.
and go,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't,
Yeah.
I'm not the best farmer, so help me
Yes.
out here. Or
Yeah.
whichever, but
And to
That's-
some degree, we are because we no longer believe in sin, we also no longer believe in shame.
Yeah.
So in some ways, we've become a shameless society, which can make it hard for us as well, right? Because if we want to keep putting things in moral terms where people are saying, this isn't moral, this is just a choice, this is self-expression, why?
Mhm,
You shouldn't judge me and you shouldn't try and make me feel bad about this.
mhm. And then I think in turn to that, like just in my role,
Yeah.
working with teachers, they don't ask the questions. They're too scared to, and they don't think they have permission to.
Right.
Whereas when I've come alongside a family and asked some of those hard questions,
Yes.
and the teachers go, I didn't know you could ask that. I'm like, well, they want to help their kid. So let's ask these questions
Yeah.
and see where they need the up, the bottom hand, hold them.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they feel supported,
Yeah.
and then they see their kid move ahead.
Yeah.
But so often nobody wants to ask the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're scared to.
Yeah. Well, and there's a cost too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There is.
How far do I want to get
Get
down
into
this
it because
rabbit
it's
hole?
messy.
I would like to leave. Go home.
This chapter also brought out the imagery. That's what I thought was kind of sad. Of women and how they have to look and, this
Right.
Venus
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
terrestrial, and I'm thinking,
Yeah.
yeah, what a competition. Probably see it in schools all the way through. The kids growing up like, if I don't dress like this or I don't look like this, I'm not a part of it. And
Yeah.
it's just it's a terrible.
Well, and
terrible
it's funny,
place.
Lewis actually echoes one of the things in my gender violence and reconciliation course I did a couple of years ago. There was a lady doing a TED talk, and she said, women are dismembered by the media. And in fact, with airbrushing and everything, they don't even have pores. So it's this image of beauty that is completely unattainable, because even those who look like they've attained it haven't. It's faked. And he's saying the exact same thing here, right? They're pinched, they're vaulted up, they're, shot at certain angles. So it's interesting for this male bachelor that doesn't, he's not reading tabloids or watching TV. He's
notice
got a
it.
handle on
He's
it.
catching
He
it.
recognizes something.
Hmm.
And it's something that, again, because of the bombardment that we spoke about earlier, it's hard for us to hold on, right? Because every one of us has probably heard that's not real. And then at some point start looking at those images again and miss the fact that those aren't real. And here we have the delight of hell, right? Again, to make you want the fantasy that can never actually be fulfilled, and even talks about, this era of jazz where you have this boyish body, which in young women can only last so long. Which means then it's almost this mirage, right? You want it, you think you finally got it. And just as you lay hands on it, it disappears,
And I think that it stays, that whole mirage again stays when you are in isolation,
Mhm.
right? Like I remember one of our kiddos too, who I think we went to Costco, and she made the comment, just said, geez, when I look around, like all the women are like different. They all don't look like what the
Yes.
kids at school say that I should or whatever.
Right.
And you're like, yeah, just open your eyes and look around. But if they're only seeing what's on social media or on the TV or whatever, it sends that message, this is what it should be,
Yes.
versus looking up and looking around.
Yes. So we have the two imaginary women, both of them Venus, one terrestrial, one infernal. Neither of them good. Because they ultimately don't exist. But this is, okay, if we can't attack his chastity, then let's get a marriage that is going to be problematic for him. So again, I think Lewis tips his hand a little bit. One of the things I was thinking as I read that chapter was he's certainly male-centric in his advice and thinking. Now, to some degree, that's because he's dealing with a fictionalized male patients. To some degree, because he is a male. But there's not a lot of attempt to to make this gender inclusive. And women in this can be set up in very thin ways, almost like a straw woman, or a caricature of a woman. So again, that might be his lack of experience, and therefore he's just falling on tropes. But yeah, I wished as I was reading that he would have had some better female character in here.
Yeah.
But they say write about what you know about. So. Well, chapter 21, Mom, you wanted to talk about that? I said make him feel ownership.
Yeah, and for me, that piece about time, that my time is my own, really hit me.
Okay.
I'm I had a complete meltdown the other day
Oh, no.
over this whole thing, this very thing, before I read this.
Yeah. Oh, you melted down before you read it.
Yeah, I just dealing with Bill's situation and trying to fit everything in, and
Yes.
and you know me, I'm a creature of habits and routines. I have my routines. I like my routines.
Yes.
They help me get things
Understood.
done.
Yeah.
Yes, and things should happen in a certain order that makes sense. And it just wasn't working that way, and I got really angry about it. And this is not the first time.
Yes.
So this really hit me that my time is not mine. It's a gift from
Right.
God that he's given me to use in his service.
Right.
That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
I had a wake up call back in my days at work. As you move into more roles of leadership, there's more leaders that you're reporting to and all this, and my whole work a day was amount of being interrupted. And you have to learn how to deal with interruptions, because I never had those before, because I wasn't interrupted.
You
And
could just work.
and so but it had to be, I had to click it in my mind. Well, this is what it is. I just have to stop, give my time.
Yes.
But I had to consciously say, okay, I can't have it the way it was before, because I'm in a new role. I'm in a new environment. I will have to learn to deal with interruptions.
Yeah.
Even though I don't like it, just like Mary, I like
Yeah.
to do my route. This is the way I'm doing it. And
Yeah. Yeah.
why are you upsetting this? And I had to change
So you had to shift philosophy,
completely.
put in a new framework.
Yeah.
Or else you would just gone mad.
Well, you've got all these people coming, then you've got your emails that are just blasting on your screen. And well, if you haven't answered the email right away, what's wrong? Are you mad? Are you, it was like crazy. But we were in that culture then where it was, that's how you had to like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah, yeah.
that's quick.
Everything is the urgent.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a struggle.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Your time isn't your own.
Yeah. It's interesting. Dallas Willard, another theologian and spiritual writer, talks about in some of his work that similar thing, not just our time, but our bodies. That's another area where we think of this body is mine. And Willard says, actually, it's not. Again, your body is a gift to you. It's something that you are to steward. And so that has implications.
So watch how much coffee you drink.
Oh, boy. Lewis paints this picture Um, where he says, if God were to show up, if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, he would not refuse. He would be greatly relieved if that one day involved nothing harder than listening to the conversation of a foolish woman, and he would be relieved almost to the pitch of disappointment if for 1/2 hour in that day the enemy said, "Now you may go and amuse yourself." Now, if he thinks about his assumption for a moment, even he's bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. So again, Lewis is trying to help us create some of that new framework, new philosophy. Okay, if it's not this, then what? Because he's not interested in creating a vacuum. It's not saying just don't think about time as your own. Well, that's no good because other masters will come in and take control. He's saying offer this back as gift to God, right? And there's that ongoing nature of the gospel that if we give up our lives, then we will truly find it. If we, again, Anna Green Gables, she faces her duty, and ever as people find when they do that, they look that duty in full in the face, and it turns out to be a friend. And it's the same sort of thing, right? If we can start to think not of time and the moments of our day as our own, but belonging to God, and then offer those moments back to Him, then we receive them back and we'll have them back with much joy. It's when we do the demonic, just try and clamp down on it. Say, oh no, this is mine. Like you're gonna have everything but this. That's the one little corner of hell that will destroy us, right?
Well, and I can give testimony to that because I would start my day early where the door was closed and I would be praying. I'd be getting center. And if it was lunchtime, same thing. I closed the door and I had my devotions and I had my quiet time. I also had little pathways where I could go walk and be by myself. It was like me and God up here in the stairwell. Nobody else goes there. So, I mean, if you don't carve out, I chose to carve out those times with God.
Yeah.
I knew I needed Him to take me through.
Yep.
I couldn't
Yep.
make this happen or
Yeah.
try to balance it all or get the rhythm that I needed.
Yes.
I needed Him.
Yes.
I think my wife kind of helped me in giving, whoa.
What would you like to say to Karen right now?
No, she really did. She threw me a kiss.
Oh, nice.
Well, you definitely do. From work, what do? You come home to your wife and you tell her everything that happened at work, right?
Not
Is
me.
that's what you do? Is that what you do, Dave?
Used to drive Sarah crazy because she said, "What do you do all day?" And I don't answer to you. We've gotten better. It is interesting, the possessive pronouns, right? The finely graded differences. My boots, my dog, my servant, my wife, my father, my master, my country, my God.
Me.
So we can say my God in the same way that we say my boots. Oh, you got a problem. And in the long run, the word mine can't be said by any of us about anything. Because we belong to somebody else. Sorry,
We were bought with a price.
that's right. The enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic legalistic ground that he made it. And our Father below hopes in the end to say mine of all things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest. Well, chapter 22, or as time goes on, if there's other chapters you want to make sure we hit, we can, but we can keep working through things like this too. So your man is in love.
Is that love again?
Yeah.
Yeah. No longer fantasy, but actual. Oh, and it is the wrong kind.
Mhm.
She is a good girl.
Or
And what's interesting, just so that you don't miss it,
She makes him vomit.
yeah, well, and he describes her as a two-faced little cheat. Then he says, I know the sort, who looks as if she'd faint at the sight of blood and then dies with a smile. The sort of creature who'd find me fun. So at one point he talks about good for the arena. And the whole, she looks like she would faint at the sight of blood, but then dies with a smile. I think he's referring to the early church martyr Perpetua,
Mm.
and her servant who died in the arena together, praying and glorifying Jesus. So I think he's talking about the early martyrs and using that as sort of a model for her. And there is a medieval philosophy that continues today, that the way that we deal with the devil is we laugh at him. Devil cannot take being laughed at. And that's why Screwtape says, the sort of creature who find me funny, and goes on and just keeps tearing apart at her.
Mhm.
So yeah, the devil cannot take being laughed at. And so mocking the devil is an ancient form of dealing with him. And again, I think Lewis is reminding us of that because evil, hell, Satan is not ultimate, he will not last. There is coming a time for his destruction. We can laugh. So it's not that we don't take it serious. It's because we take him serious that we do laugh, right? So G.K. Chesterton says that we make jokes about the things that are most important. That's why we joke about marriage. That's why we joke about death. That's why we joke about religion. It's okay to have a sense of humor on those things. Again, Screwtape's talked a little bit about jokes already. But yeah, we should be able to laugh at the devil. And this goes back to Lewis's preface. It says we don't want to the two opposite errors, right? That we ignore them or disbelieve in them altogether, or believe and take too much of an interest in them. This is kind of the middle ground. We take them serious and we laugh at them because we know that while they do have real effect, they don't have ultimate effect.
so like music and silence either.
Right?
There's so much in music. And
What
so
did
much
you
in silence.
think of that?
Oh, that's cool. I think there's music is such a powerful medium for worship, for drawing you to God's presence. Of course, the devil wouldn't like that, or being quiet.
So
Same way.
hell is filled with noise, doesn't like music, and doesn't like silence. What's the difference between noise and music?
Well, music has order. Noise is just chaos.
Okay,
That's what I would see it as.
right. Yeah.
And it distracts you.
Right.
There's noise going on all over you. You almost can't think.
Yes.
So in the silence, you can
Yeah.
organize your thoughts, this process, and put things in order.
Being
Yes.
still, Holy Spirit, still small voice. It's
Be able
just a
to hear
quiet
it.
voice.
Yeah.
It's not a booming voice. It's a gentle.
So again, we'll see it a little later, surprised by joy. There's a couple of references to this sense of heaven breaking in. I think for Lewis, music is one of the divine channels. And I think you're quite right. Difference between chaos and order. Music is rhythm. Music is a pattern of sound and silence that produces and can convey beauty, can convey awe. And so again, can be a channel for God. Same with that silence, whereas noise, that cacophony, pushes things out, does not allow space, thought, feeling.
Mhm.
Music also instills memory,
Right.
the recall.
Mhm.
Yes, affirms, your belief. It's just there. So often you'll hear a lyric or old hymns, and it's just,
Yes.
there's the reminder.
Mhm. I think it's in nature too, like in creation, there's music and silence,
Mhm.
right? Like if you're in the mountains or
Mhm.
by the ocean,
Yes.
there's this rhythm of the waves that can
Yes.
create a sense of music. But you can be walking in a forest and there's silence. It's like what God created for us to.
I was thinking as I read this section of Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe and the melting of spring as Aslan comes in the bird song beginning, the music of the little party, the tea party. Yeah.
Mhm.
Screwtape references the miserific vision, which is kind of the opposite to the beatific vision that is expected. And that's a Catholic doctrine. The beatific vision is ultimately we see God, right? Who is beauty. And so in the Reformation, you had the Catholic Church that when we get to heaven, we will see God as he sees us. For the reformers like Calvin and Luther, we will know God as we are known. And for Wesley, we will love God as we are loved. I don't think those are three competing visions. I think they enhance and inform each other. We will see, know, and love God in as he is himself in all of his beauty and all of his knowableness. The miserific vision, a little different than that. And to me, what was particularly important to note is that everything is in the Christian's favor. So he says everything has to be twisted before it's of any use to us. Right? So
Mhm.
things as they naturally are, these natural gifts, are part of, again, the surprise by joy, these moments that channel God's presence to us.
Hmm.
And so here it is, this woman and her family, even the bloody dog and cat are tainted with it. So again, there's that sense of incense aroma. There's something holy about them. In their hospitality, that odor goes with those who stay with them. They are influencers. It changes people, even in the briefest of times, even in the most tangential relationships. There's something winsome about these people in their faith.
I liked how he said a house full of impenetrable mystery.
Right.
Like, I
Yes.
always think of God as mysterious and
Yes.
Can you give an understanding to how he ends that chapter? Because I just couldn't wrap my head around it. I can't comprehend what he's trying to say.
So I think again, this roots into medieval theology to some degree. Basically, Screwtape is just in the temper And in his temper, in his passion, he loses control and he transforms into a centipede. And so, because he's a senior devil, he has a secretary who finishes off the chapter for him. As he can't, or the missive for him.
What's he trying to get at? What's his point?
Um, I'm not sure, honestly.
I couldn't get it. I read it, I'm like,
Yeah,
this doesn't make any sense to me.
well, I think, so I don't know the actual kind of theological roots. I suspect they're in, so like Ovid writes Metamorphosis. I haven't read that yet, so I think there is some of that. But if we just take the text as it stands, Milton tells us that such changes of shape are a punishment imposed on us by the enemy. So even hell is not separated from the presence of God, right? So Screwtape in this rage against this woman, he's blaspheming, right? And in his blasphemy, God punishes him and stops that blasphemy. So I think in some ways,
Who's the writer? Shaw?
Shaw,
Who's that?
again, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
Not sure if that's George Bernard Shaw. There are a few contemporaries of Lewis and Chesterton that they both kind of address, so that might be who he's talking to, but I'm not 100% sure.
When he signed it, toad pipe, is that a code for somebody or?
That's
is
the
that
secretary
That's
that
the
finished the
secretary.
letter.
why did he use toad pipe?
That's the secretary's name. Is Toad Pipe, just like Screwtape's name is Screwtape and
Okay. I
Wormwood's
was
name is
wondering
Worm.
if there was a subliminal message to why he called that
Oh.
secretary toad pipe.
No. At least not that I know. I think he's just kind of like slug blob, and you're just trying to think of things that, toads are kind of slimy, put people off, so pipes can be smelly. So
Yeah,
there you go,
maybe,
toad
yeah.
pipe, right? So I think it's more meant to try and evoke a feeling than a rational attempt at saying something. So Dickens was really big on characters' names that kind of reflected some sort of characteristic about them, but not Lewis. Wow.
Hmm.
So if we cannot, in chapter 23, if we cannot remove spirituality from his life, then the recourse is to corrupt it. So thus far, we have been trying to derail and end the Christianity. That clearly is not working. And so a new tact must be taken. And so here is make him a spoiled saint, a Pharisee, an inquisitor, or a magician. So again, spirituality is one of the areas that we are tempted in. And even Christian spirituality can move in simple ways. So Lewis is making us aware of that.
It's interesting how Lewis is so good at writing. I like the world and the flesh have failed us,
Yeah.
but a third power made us. Power? That's the devil. No,
Yeah.
but he's writing it in such an opposite way.
Right. Yeah.
You have to keep trying to wrap your mind.
Yeah,
around
yeah.
What does he say?
If to translate everything, eh?
Well, he's saying the devil's got that's the power.
Yeah.
No.
Oh. And so the advice is to have them look for the historical Jesus, which of course was very big at the time. And has been, I remember going into Bible college and the Jesus seminar coming up with its own translation of scripture, and they had these kind of voting colors and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, this trying to get behind and find the historical Jesus. Of course, the idea there is for us to, rather than read the Gospels as the four biographies of Jesus and allow them to have their multivalent voice, it's to try and cut that down, harmonize, to get behind it, find out what really happened, and substitute a Jesus of our own making for the Jesus of Scripture.
Mm.
And so we get the Jesus and, right?
Destroy the devotional life.
Yeah. And so there's always a temptation to make Jesus into our image, right? To understand Jesus in our terms and make him, again, I said it in the sermon on Sunday, right? If there's no difference between what we believe and who we are and who God is, and he's completely on our side, then it might be that we have constructed a God rather than encountered the God of Scripture. So, historical Jesus on liberal or humanitarian or Marxian, catastrophic, revolutionary. So these are all options. And it's not that those things shouldn't be thought about and not thought about in relationship to Jesus. Problem is when we reduce Jesus to that thing, that cause, that perspective, is when it becomes problematic, because we try and cut off the crusts.
It's interesting too, it kind of ended the social justice.
Yeah.
How, oh my goodness, what do we see in our day and age now?
Yeah.
So social justice is at the top of the heap.
Yeah.
It's all about me, and my rights and what I have.
Well, and again, Lewis is a product of his day, and for evangelicalism, there did become, to distinguish it from the mainline churches, this idea that social justice was antithetical to the gospel. That there's either this pure gospel, which is kind of the bridge illustration, or there's social justice. But I really like thinkers like N.T. Wright, who says, well, if Jesus is Lord of all, then he's Lord over all, which means, yes, there's no competition between the gospel of Jesus and social justice. The life and ministry of Jesus does inform the cross, and the cross informs the life and ministry of Jesus. So we have to interpret those things in light of each other, which means Jesus does care about social justice. That is a component of the gospel. We just cannot reduce it. So again, Screwtape says, we accomplish this by suppressing one part and exaggerating another part. And I think, the doctrine of personal sinning and confession and repentance versus caring for the poor, we can exaggerate and suppress one or other of those things, right? And then set them up as if they're antithetical to each other, but they're not. The politics of Jesus means, as the church, we say we embody Jesus in our neighborhoods, we do want to be declaring a message of salvation and openness of the kingdom, an invitation for people to believe, to repent. We also want to be meeting people's needs. You know, what would happen if Jesus encountered somebody who was hungry or struggling? He would help, and he desires us to help as well. So they're not necessarily antithetical to each other. But we can fall into the trap of elevating one, suppressing the other, and making one good, the other bad, that kind of thing. And I think that's what Screwtape wants us to do, right? We can have Christianity plus.
Just you look at the states and how they're so polarized with, you know, if you're a Republican, you're a Christian, you're a good person,
Right.
but
Yeah,
it's all a lie. All they stole that from us, and you know, I'm like, really? You know,
Yeah.
like there is such a demonic presence going on in such a huge country,
Yeah.
and they're not seeing it, you know, and they're divided completely.
yeah.
And that's where I'm saying I see the social justice. They're screaming it
Mhm.
so loud.
Yeah.
But yet, and they stand on the pillar that we're Christians.
Yep.
We're right.
Yep.
How come nobody else can see it?
Yeah.
You're so wrong.
Mhm.
It's twisted.
It's
Okay.
like if you have a log in your own eye,
Right.
it's like the blind leading the
Yeah,
blind.
yeah. Yeah, how can you remove the speck from your brother's eye when you have a log in your own eye?
That was a show. The guy was talking about a show at work. It's like the show that's based like 40 years from now.
Yeah,
And basically everybody is blind at that point because you don't need sight, right? Like
Okay.
you can like basically they're saying like the chip in your brain
okay,
will just lead you. Like you don't need
Hmm.
basically just like Wally.
yeah,
Like you know how basically they don't need anything. They just have the screen right there. Like they're just
Yeah.
going around blindly.
yeah,
It's like kind of that idea is like we're right. And that singular group of people is all right. So you don't need to think or
right,
anything. You just need a chip in your brain to tell you what's right. We'll tell
Yeah.
you everything that's right.
yeah,
So that was interesting.
yes. Yeah, so I think Lewis's advice to us is keep coming back to scripture, right?
Mhm.
The gospels come later and were written not to make Christians, but to edify Christians already made.
And it was always the unexpected. You know, how Christ responded to people,
Yeah.
the grace, the love, the forgiveness, the conversation,
Yes.
always
Yeah.
unexpected.
Yeah. I like Martin Luther would talk about the whipsaw. So if you think of a whipsaw as that two-handed saw that you would cut a tree with, and so Luther would say we are whipsawed between law and grace. And so kind of where that lands pastorally, if somebody comes to you and they are struggling with a sense of condemnation, right? They're under guilt. You know, I've sinned clearly. God can't love me. I can't be forgiven. Well, then that is time for the word of grace, right? You whipsaw them to grace, which says where sin comes in, grace abounds all the more. There's no limit to God's love, no limit to his willingness to forgive, to receive. All you have to do is repent and receive that forgiveness. And you know, so you do grace. Somebody comes to you and there's a cavalier attitude, there's licentiousness. You know, I can do anything. You know, I can have this affair, I can have a girlfriend, I can, you know, whatever it is. Then it's time for law, right? God won't be made a fool of. There are consequences. His mercy is not extended forever. Like he wants to bring conviction so that you will repent and be restored. And so, yeah, that need to kind of respond to the situation. You know, does this call for a word of, you know, even as we were talking earlier, James says somebody comes into your assembly and they're cold, they're hungry, telling them God bless, be well, and go on your way is useless. You haven't provided them with grace. You know, you need to feed them, clothe them, warm them, house them. So is that same sort of thing, right? Is it social justice or is it the gospel? depends on the situation. Is this somebody who is struggling with a desire to enter the kingdom and wants to know how, or is this somebody that is in need because they're suffering from some form of oppression, and it's, you know,
Mhm.
part of our duty is to help lift them up, to relieve that to whatever degree that we can.
That's getting in the messiness though, Dave.
It
So you have
is,
to ask more questions. and,
yes,
you
yeah,
know, Right? And people
yeah.
are afraid to do that.
yeah. Yep. It is, there is a cost, yeah. Sorry, time, 8:23. I want to skip to the final chapter. What I have described, chapter 31, hell and heaven revealed. My dear, my very dear Wormwood, my poppet, my pig's knee. How mistakenly now that all is lost, you come whimpering to ask me whether the terms of affection in which I address you meant nothing from the beginning. Far from it. Rest assured, my love for you and your love for me are as like as two peas. I have always desired you, as you, pitiful fool, desired me. The difference is that I am the stronger. I think they will give you to me now, or a bit of you. Love you? Why, yes, as dainty a morsel as ever I grew fat. So how revealed? So Uncle Screwtape has been addressing his letters, my dear Wormwood, and your affectionate Uncle Screwtape. Lewis warned us in the beginning that Screwtape is a liar, not even from his own perspective, not everything can be taken at face value. We have seen the philosophy of hell is to consume, for the stronger to dominate the weaker. And that is ultimately what will happen. And so Screwtape is really happy. So while he has been apparently trying to help this junior devil, we now have to ask the question, has he really been trying to help?
Mhm.
Has he been all along giving advice that is guaranteeing failure? Is Wormwood's failure Wormwood's or Screwtape's? And what does that do for the things that we've been noticing? If Screwtape has been giving bad advice, how does that impact the advice that we've been harvesting as we've read through the chapters? I'm not looking for an answer. I'm just putting some things on the table as interesting to think about.
Mhm.
That
Lots
would kind of turn things on its head.
I think I'm very happy that the whole side of evil is so chaotic and not organized.
Okay. Bob's gonna tell us what you said.
I told her to use the speaker, but she didn't want to.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So
extra-
we have this revelation of hell, right? We really see what it's about. In the end, it's about this ultimate consumption.
Mhm.
Kingdom of noise. It's referred
Yeah.
to.
Down to the very throne itself. And so, you know, we'll see, we'll see in the last battle, we'll see in somewhat in the Great Divorce, the sense of heaven being more and more true heaven as you go further up and further in. You get deeper and deeper into heaven. And so hell seems to be the antithesis, right? Down to the very throne itself. And
Mhm.
so hell seems to become more hellish as you descend. So again, that's medieval theology, right? There's this hierarchy and lowerarchy as a
Mhm.
result.
So the
But-
idea that Wormwood would be trusting Screwtape. Like that's. Screwtape is lower in the hierarchy,
Right.
in a
In the
sense,
lowerarchy, yeah.
in the lowerarchy.
Yeah,
To be so twisted to think that his nephew would trust him.
right. Well, and remember, their desire for each other are as like as two peas in a pod.
Mhm.
So not only has Screwtape been harboring this desire and hope to consume
him.
Woodward.
Yeah.
But Wormwood has also desired and been angling to get in a power position over Screwtape
Screwtape.
so that he can consume him.
Mm.
And so, again, the picture of hell. So one way that Lewis depicts hell is I'll say we're sitting at a banquet table, and it is just flowing with good food, rich food, lovely food, and you're starving, you're thirsting, you're desperate for anything. The problem is you can only feed other people. Your arms are too long to feed yourself. And so hell continues to go on thirsting and starving because it is selfish. And no point can it make any kind of a deal that you feed me and I'll feed you, because hell is ultimately competition. Great Divorce, it's this great town where people can't stand to be together. And so they keep moving out, moving out further and further away. And they can't get far away enough from each other. There's no community. There's this
Mhm.
hyper individuality. And then they complain because they're alone,
Yeah.
right? And they have nobody to talk to.
Mhm.
So there's this sense of constant
Mhm.
misery. It's kind of the
And there
picture.
isn't really a belief in their structure either, right?
Right.
Like they can like trump each other or
Well, and
consume
in
each
Great
other.
Divorce, hell doesn't know that it's hell.
Yeah.
They think they're just this town, right? They think they're still alive
I
to
know,
some
I
degree.
love the ending.
They have no sense of who and what they are and how horrific and ugly ultimately they are, and unsubstantial.
So I wonder too, if Lewis was trying to end this book with how twisted Wormwood and Screwtapes were, because you trusted me. And so I think of how our relationship is with God.
Right.
We have a relationship. It's everything about the relationship with who the Father. He is the truth. And it's a solid relationship. This relationship was devious. It had undercurrents. It had a modus operandi that were selfish.
Right.
And so, I mean, our whole faith is built upon a relationship.
Yeah.
It's hard to explain that to someone till they get to the point where they've surrendered their lives. What do you mean relationship? Your relationships are always what you see, what's around you. I can't see God. He's not around. Where is he? And then something happens, well, there, look, see? So you can see how it takes a while for someone to come into the faith basis of this God.
But hearing that, exactly that idea that he does want relationship, I think that's a piece that has been missing at many points in evangelism, right? Like there's these steps to becoming a Christian versus, because I know even Maren was sharing when she was at camp this summer and with one particular kiddo that she was in her cabin, and she's just like, when she shared her story, how Jesus was on the floor with her when she was battling her issues, and Jesus was here, and she's like, I have never ever heard that your God was beside you. Like it's always, I gotta go into a building, I gotta dress like this, I have to sit
It's
like
right
that.
here with me.
Yeah, he's just right there. And she's like, that's the first time ever I've heard of a God that does, your God that wants to know me.
Yeah.
And so that makes me kind of like, oh, about a lot.
Yeah.
In regards to that, like.
Well, it's 8:32. So I love the picture. So we need to keep in mind that Lewis is writing this in the midst of World War II. So it's very likely people are gonna die the way this man died, right? Through a bombing of a town. Doing their duty, maybe not doing their duty, just getting caught. But what happens if that happens? There was a sudden clearing of his eyes as he saw you, the devil, or wormwood, for the first time, and recognized the part you had in him and knew that you had it no longer. That battle is over. Just think what he felt at that moment, as if a scab had fallen from an old sword, as if he were emerging from a hideous shell-like tether, as if he shuffled off for good and all a defiled, wet, clinging garment. No gradual misgivings, no doctor's sentence, no nursing home, no operating theater, no false hopes of life, sheer instantaneous liberation. One moment it seemed to be all our world, the scream of bombs, the fall of houses, the stinking taste of high explosive on the lips and in the lungs, the feet burning with weariness, the heart pulled with horrors, the brain reeling, the legs aching. Next moment, all this was gone, gone like a bad dream, never again to be of any account, defeated, outmaneuvered fool. Did you mark how naturally, as if he'd been born for it, the earth-born vermin entered the new life? How all his doubts became in the twinkling of an eye ridiculous? Know what the creature was saying? I know what the creature was saying to itself. Yes, of course. It always was like this. All horrors have followed the same course, getting worse and worse and forcing you into a kind of bottleneck till at the very moment when you thought you must be crushed, behold, you were out of the narrows and all was suddenly well. The extraction hurt more and more, and then the tooth was out. The dream became a nightmare. That harkens back to mere Christianity. The dream became a nightmare, and then you woke. You die, and then you are beyond death. How could I ever have doubted it? He saw you, he also saw them. This thing of earth and slime could stand upright and converse with spirits before whom you, a spirit, could only cower. Gods are strange to mortal eyes, and yet they are not strange. He had no faintest conception till that very hour of how they would look, and even doubted their existence. But when he saw them, he knew that he had always known them, and realized what part each one of them had played at many an hour in his life when he had supposed himself alone, so that now he could say to them one by one, not who are you, but so it was you all the time. All that they were and said at this meeting woke memories. The dim consciousness of friends about him, which had haunted his solitude from infancy, was now at last explained. That central music in every pure experience, which had always just evaded memory, was now at last recovered. Recognition made him free of their company almost before the limbs of his corpse became quiet. He saw not only them, he saw him. This animal, this thing begotten in a bed, could look on him. What is blinding, suffocating fire to you is now cool light to him, is clarity itself, and wears the form of a man, referring to Jesus. You would like, if you could, to interpret the patient's prostration in the presence, his self-abhorrence and utter knowledge of his sins, on the analogy of your own choking and paralyzing sensations when you encountered the deadly air that breathes from the heart of heaven. But it's all nonsense. Pains he may still have to encounter, so the possibility of purgatory, but they embrace those pains. They would not barter them for any earthly pleasure. All the delights of sense or heart or intellect with which you could once have tempted him, even the delights of virtue itself, now seem to him in comparison, but as the half nauseous attractions of a rattled harlot would seem to a man who hears that his true beloved whom he has loved all his life, and whom he had believed to be dead is alive and even now at his door. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And you who bid me enter, I will come in and dine with him and he with me. He is caught up into that world where pain and pleasure take on transfinite values, and all our arithmetic is dismayed. Once more, the inexplicable meets us. So it's a fairly beautiful vision,
Mhm.
beatific vision. So just to cap that, in that moment of death is revealed evil and its role in the person's life, and it has no role any longer because evil is not ultimate. There's a recognition of those heavenly beings, those resources that have been ours from infancy to the moment of our death. And they welcome us like an old friend, the forgotten music of heaven, now recaptured and remembered for the first time, and is to play forever. And then our eye is brought up further to him, the one who sits on the throne, and we fall prostrate. And in light, in his light, everything else just falls away. Pain, pleasure, virtue, only means something in relationship to him, but pale compared to the struggle of this life. And so it's the fulfillment of the promise of love in a descriptive, imaginative way. That, of course, again, Screwtape and Wormwood are tortured by, tormented by, and still cannot understand, because we see love expressed. There's this uniting without the loss of either person, whereas Wormwood and Screwtape are about to practice hell.
Mhm.
I'm going to stop there.